Welcome to The Writer's Dream. This is a show where authors can talk about how they write their books, how they publish their books, and how they market their books. We are on Facebook. We are on YouTube. Just search for The Writer's Dream. If you have questions about the show, please address them to Facebook, and I will try to get back to you on those. We are now on Pinterest. We have a few little items on Pinterest. So if you are a writer and you would like to be on the show, please go on my website, which is just merely my name, Linda Maria Frank, and contact me through the website, and I'd be happy to have you on. We do 2 shows a month, 2 interview shows a month, and we have some very interesting people on our show. Today's guest is Rae Levine, who is the writer of All About Colorblindness, Sister Raven, and The Clay Messiah.
Yes.
And 3 very different books, which indicate to me, Karen, that you are a multiple source of information.
Sometimes I think too much, and there are so many topics that I'm interested in.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? It's difficult to be, I'm going to say this, but it's difficult to be a smart person. Right? It is. Your head kind of almost wants to explode at times.
Right. It's true. Can I say it's true?
Yes,
it's true.
yes.
But there are perks, and
Would you want to?
I love to learn. I just love to learn.
Me too. I like to find out about things. I like to
Right.
know things.
I like to know things, and not only do I like to know things, facts. I like to know
Why?
personal things about. I want to know about the people, which is why 2 of my books are really historical fiction or maybe historical fantasy, so with some fantastic elements, because my imagination can take over as well. So I want to know about the history, and on the 2 books that are historically based, I did a lot of research before. But what I think I really wanted to understand was the people involved, and not just the facts of what happened. I mean, I did discover some amazing facts about what happened, but what was more amazing to me was what it was like for the people, especially in The Clay Messiah, which takes place at the liberation of a concentration camp. And one character is a soldier, a Jewish American soldier who's part of the liberating force, and the other one is a survivor. And there's also a field nurse, who's part of it. And there is a little bit of fantasy with a creature called the Golem.
I was gonna say, which book do you want to start with and tell us about all of them, but since you started with them, go right ahead.
Well,
I love the Golem. He keeps popping up in all the stories I read.
I know, he's becoming more popular. I see him
absolutely.
in more books.
And less frightening. He's more like a good guy.
Well, the history of the
talk
Golem,
about him.
which I did a lot of research about. The Golem, you can really go back to the Old Testament, where Adam is made of clay, and there is mention of a golem, and God made man from the earth, but a golem is not made by God; he's made by man, so he does not have a complete soul. So sometimes in old stories, in the Jewish folklore, they're comical. He's a comical character. The rabbi's wife tells him to go and fetch water, but he doesn't stop fetching water because he doesn't know any better, and the whole place is flooded. And and then the moral of usually of those older Golem stories is that leave the creation to God. Like that this isn't going to work. And then all of a sudden, in like the early 1900s, a book was published about the Golem of Prague and how the rabbi made the man of clay to protect the citizens of the Jewish ghetto from
in Prague,
in
right?
Prague. In Prague. That's the most famous story.
Right.
And in that story, the Golem is the savior. He's the hero. He's the strong man. He's Superman. He's the protector. He's not the silly one that's flooding the house.
The
with water.
Gumby type person.
Exactly, right. So somebody can, kind of change the concept of the Golem. And I think most people who know about a golem associate the golem with that kind of creature.
Did you read Snow in August by Pete Hamill?
Yeah, I
It's
saw the
about
movie.
a little. No, I don't think they made a movie, but
No,
it's
there was a
about-
movie.
Was it?
Yeah, I didn't go through the book though.
I think no. I think you're thinking of Snow Falling on Cedars.
No.
I mean, Snow in August. Well, anyway,
we'll fight it out
Snow in
later.
August is about right. We'll duke it out at the flagpole. Snow in August is about a little Irish boy who befriends a Jewish rabbi, and he lives in a very bad neighborhood. And the Jewish rabbi is attacked by some older bully kids, and the little boy tries to rescue the rabbi and is beaten up very badly and goes into a coma, and he has this whole thing with the golem.
Oh, is that where it goes?
Yeah, and
There was
it's
some part I
so
didn't get-
what
I
a
couldn't
good
get through
book.
it.
What a
Oh, you
what a-
liked it.
I loved that book, and then Wishnir, the author Wishnir, who was on this show,
Oh.
he wrote, I think it was The Fifth Witness, about a young Jewish. He was like an aide to the rabbi, and he leaves Poland because they were all driven out of Poland. But this takes place, back in the Middle Ages, and he goes to the ghetto in Prague, and the Christians kill a little Christian girl just so they could blame it on the Jews in the Prague, and in the ghetto, I'm sorry. And so the whole story revolves around how they use the golem to help solve the problem, protect
That's
the ghetto.
basically the savior's story in the Golem of Prague.
Right, so in both of those stories, you really didn't see the goofy element of it, the silly golem, but the
No,
good
you
golem.
see, well, is it good? That's what I questioned when I wrote the book.
Okay, so tell us about
How
it.
good is it to be a golem?
I don't know.
Sometimes I think you have to be a golem in extreme circumstances, in particular when you're living in fear for your life, if you're a soldier, or if you're living in a concentration camp. You have to kind of armor yourself. You have to be a golem. You have to leave your sensitivities behind. And so that's a little bit of mysticism that I put into the book, kind of a symbol for what you have to be when you're in complete survival mode. And I wondered what that was like, and I thought it was golem-like, and I thought that being a golem or being like a golem or having a golem is useful. But what if you're not in that situation? Because this book takes place at a liberation. And a lot of stories end with the liberation of the camps, and everybody's cheering, and I thought there must be something more to this.
It's the beginning of so many stories.
It's the beginning of so much, and people, it was towards the war's end, though you knew the war was still coming to an end, but the survivors didn't know if they, where and how, and the soldiers could still get killed even though as they were traveling through Germany. They didn't know what a concentration camp was, and they were shocked by what they found. So, but then they're not really free, because Eisenhower, the Dachau concentration camp is in Germany. The one I'm writing about in particular was not a death camp. It was an incarceration. A work camp. And the population was mostly not Jewish.
That I did not know.
No, yeah, it was not. It's the first concentration camp, and built in 1933, and it was attached to an SS training ground. So, which is part of the story as well, and that's where the medical team set up the hospitals and stuff. So it's a weird situation, for lack of a better word. But getting back to the golem. So here we have a soldier, and we have a survivor, and we even have a nurse who's been treating on the front line, the casualties, which are horrible. And now she's not treating the war wounded, she's treating stick figures starving with typhus, mistreated, and it's a whole new experience. Everything turns upside down there, and they say to the inmates, you're free, but they're not free, because Eisenhower doesn't want the roads crowded with refugees because the war is still going on, and they're really still stuck in the camp. Only they're under the care of the Americans.
Right, right.
So
They were called DPs, I think, displaced persons.
yeah, they went to DP camps after after a few weeks. But this particular story takes place within the 6 weeks, where they're still in the camps. They are still, cannot leave
Right.
the camp because they might
There's
be
no
infected
place-
with typhus.
Well,
And
there's no place for them to go.
they lost their homes. There's no place to go. And now they're free and they're being fed and they're not afraid of dying at any moment. And now the survivors can think about what they lost. And they can't go home. One of my characters says, the mailman's living in my house. You think I can go back there and, tell him to get off my toilet bowl? No, I can't. Where am I going to go? Then there's anger and there's mourning. When you're in golem mode, you're not thinking about
No, you're
the
thinking about
family
the
that
next
you
minute.
lost.
You're thinking about the next minute.
The next minute, the next second, the next hour. You're watchful all the time. And this goes on for years for the soldiers and survivors.
I remember the war. I'm much older than you are, and I remember the war, and I remember at the end of the war, I remember my parents talking about, yes, that person's a DP. In other words, they eventually kind of, made their way to different countries to live,
Yes.
to make a home.
Yeah.
Or if they had relatives here in America, they would come and live with them. But I remember my parents referring to different people as DPs, displaced persons. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was, I remember, I was very young, but I do remember the great sadness that I had relatives in Poland, and they weren't Jewish, but they were still,
Yes.
Poland was like really,
Devastated.
devastated, and I just remember
Right.
the
Well,
great
not all the
sadness.
displaced people were Jewish,
That's right.
for sure.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So
Millions and millions of people were displaced because of that war. And everybody's lives were turned upside down.
yeah,
So I wrote a story in the context of this group of people, but that doesn't mean it doesn't apply to any
Well,
other
what
group
about Syria?
that were victims or any other
Sure.
group in our history or what's going on now.
Well, yes, exactly. I mean, what's going on now is a terrible situation as well. But the story for the writer, to me, is what makes people survive. What makes people.
That's
go
what I
on.
wanted to know. That's what I wanted to know. And I was drawn. I've always been drawn to that period in history. That's why this book is very special to me. And this is the most recent one that I just published it. Although I started it in 2006.
That's not too bad.
No, it's not too bad.
It isn't.
But I
Because
couldn't.
it's research.
It's a lot of research. Sometimes I researched myself out of writing. Sometimes I think I did so much research that it was like a kind of an excuse not to write about it because it was scary to write about. And I think I had to learn a lot about myself, and in addition to learning about the history, and I did, and that's why I think it took me that many years because over those years of my life changed a lot. So when everything that I've written is something that I needed to learn. Maybe it's a little selfish, but
No.
I needed to learn about me, and except for the picture book, which is for children. Although I did learn a lot, and I did it for my son, who was colorblind, and there were no resources out, and that's a whole publishing fiasco story. I ended up publishing it myself because nobody thought it was important. So that was a whole other learning experience for me as well. But my life changed as I wrote the book, and I think I needed to. And I look back on both of the novels that I've written. It wasn't until I was done that I looked back and I realized why I wrote it, why I was attracted to that time period, and why I needed to know these things for me. And then I hope that I did it well enough so that my readers can discover some things as well.
Now, were you afraid when you wrote about this? Were you afraid that because you didn't live through anything like this? Thank God, most of us have not.
Yes.
That you would inadequately tell the story, tell the feelings of the people because you hadn't been through it yourself?
Constantly in fear of that.
Yeah.
And
that's
saying,
what I
and
would've
sometimes saying, well, who am I?
Yeah.
Who am I to do this? And that's, I think, why I was so adamant about the research and talking to people. I did in my own interviews,
Oh, sure.
as well as watching personal histories, you know, and reading memoirs, and to the point where I had to stop,
Yeah.
you know, at points and shelve it for a while.
It had to be painful.
But it was painful, but it was cathartic, because it's not just about the horror. It's about hope. It's about transformation. You know, it's about a terrible time, and not everybody comes out smelling like a rose. There are good people and there are bad people, and you know, one of the really great people is a priest from Prague, who knows the Golem Story. You know, so it's a book about tolerance. You know, I don't want to call it. I mean, it's the characters. Most of the characters are Jewish, and it deals. It comes from the perspective, from a Jewish perspective, because there were Jewish soldiers who liberated camps, and I thought, what an experience to think that I even met somebody. There's a dog tag on the front of the book, and I asked the museum permission to use the photo, and they said, well, you have to ask the family. So I contacted the family, and it was a more profound story than the one I made up. It was a young soldier from Poland, and he ended up he escaped to the United States, and then ended up in the army in Europe, but his whole family had perished at the hands of the Nazis, and he was part of the liberation force of a concentration camp. So imagine a young man, you know, these are babies.
Yes.
These are
Sure.
20-year-olds.
Sure.
I have a 20-year-old. I can't even imagine him with a gun, you know, or you know, dodging bullets, whatever, or seeing this or experiencing this, and he was a Jewish soldier who liberated the camp, and then found out that that's how his family perished. So how deep can, you know, you can't.
No.
I can't express it.
No.
And I think maybe that's what it was, because I wanted, the Holocaust is huge. It's just such a huge, too many people, too many stories. It was filling my brain. I didn't know.
And that it happened.
And that it happened. And how did it happen? And why? And who's a good guy and who's a bad guy? Are there good guys and bad guys? You know, what is evil? Or maybe it isn't, or you don't. Everybody's got a story. So
Evil happens when good men do nothing.
Evil.
Who said that? Was that?
I don't know.
But it's a quote from, it could be Churchill, but it could be somebody else
Yes.
too. But evil happens.
Evil happens.
When good men do nothing.
But are they really evil people?
Yeah, well, I
You
don't
don't know. You know, you look at someone and you can't really put a blanket statement over everybody, and that's my philosophy in life, that's hard to translate to something where. You know, I see good guys and bad guys. So I took just a little piece, just this little 6 weeks of a horrendous event, and examined it so that I could understand maybe a little more the whole extent of it. And I think I do understand. And I've been actually, I got a great, the most touching review I have of the book is from somebody who was in the 45th Infantry Division, who was part of the Liberation Force.
I might have it here.
It's from David Israel, his name, and the book he wrote is The Day the Thunderbird Cried. And the Thunderbird was the division's name. They had a Thunderbird on their patch. It's more
Right,
recent than maybe what you have. I just put it up.
Yeah, no.
And he said, I did a good job. So that was the most meaningful thing.
Sure.
And
From somebody who was there.
right. I actually used his book as a resource, but I never thought to contact him because he wrote kind of a memoir as a soldier about his unit that liberated the Dachau camp.
Too bad we didn't know. We could have had him on too.
Well, you know, he's from Brooklyn, but he lives in Oregon now.
Oh.
So that's a good reason to go visit Oregon. I really want to meet him. He sounds like a great guy.
Yeah.
And his book is very interesting. But his book is memoir, and that's a great source
Oh, yeah.
And then there are books that are history books, which are a great source. And I think it's fair to say that historical fiction is a good source. It's a good force and source for information if it's accurate. And I made sure that it was accurate down to the
Well,
weather.
my favorite authors are authors who write fiction based on history, and they're careful about the history.
You have to be responsible.
Because that is so fascinating. It's what would happen if. Here's let's take the assassination of Lincoln. What happened if?
Right, exactly.
You know, that's always the most fascinating topic. I'm looking at your 3 books, and I'm thinking to myself, we started with color blindness for your son. We went on to Sister Raven, which is like a mythological story about, it's what's very popular today. And then you moved on to a very, very serious work. Do you feel that you grew as a writer through these books?
Absolutely. Because I started with a book for children, and I thought I'd be a writer for children because it was all I was reading when I started writing that book. I was reading picture books. I knew them very well.
Yeah.
And I found out my son was colorblind when he was 4. It was my youngest son. I had just gotten laid off. I was an engineer at Grumman, and I had time, and I loved to write when I was young. And all of a sudden, you know, once he went into kindergarten and stuff, I had some me time. And what I really wanted to do and started doing was writing and going to workshops and all this. So that's when I said, oh, I'll write a book about colorblindness and everybody will know about it. Well, 14 years later, here it is. So that's a whole publishing story. That was easy for me to write in many respects because I had the information. I knew how to communicate it to children. I'm an organized person, you know, by nature, you know, being an engineer. And I knew kids and how they like to read and write, so I wrote it for every different publishing house in every different format that they had, and nobody wanted to publish it because they didn't think it was important. I'm happy to say now that it's really people are becoming aware of it. So that was my first little, I'll just do this, and then Sister Raven, as opposed to 8 years it took me to write this, Sister Raven I wrote in 6 months. And I thought it was YA because the character is 15. I was particularly careful about the historical background, and it takes place in pre-Columbian native New England. So, but the fantasy is not a traditional tribal fantasy of the period. I made it up. I was discouraged from using that as a setting because there's a political battle about and groups of Native Americans who are not happy about non-natives writing books about Native Americans. And my thesis, when I got my MFA in creative writing, was about Native Americans in children's literature. And I can tell you that, you know, their gripe is real.
Oh, yes.
You know, yes.
Oh, yeah.
But for some reason it had to be, and I couldn't put it on another planet, and it just, I went with my gut. That it means I'm not selling a lot of books, but I'm proud of what I wrote, you know. It got an award as a novella, so let's just say it's a novella. I think it's for adults too. The themes are kind of adult. It's like being in an unhealthy relationship.
Good children's books are wonderful for adults because the lessons are clearly drawn and simple, and usually they're very engaging because you need to engage children.
Right.
You know, we read for the sake of, we love a book and we read, and sometimes we put up with a lot of stuff to read the book. But children, you have to grab their interest.
You have to be careful with your words, and I liked reading young adult because, you know, War and Peace doesn't hold my attention.
Oh, I have tried every possible way to get through that book, and
but I don't think it's fair to the reader. I'm like, I just want to say, I want to say it in its little words, not as little words, but I want to paint you a picture.
That's right.
In a paragraph, not a chapter particularly. That's why 6 weeks in a Holocaust situation, and I have it in 224 pages. And I believe it's engaging and real, and, you know, it's been reviewed as such. even by Thane Rosenbaum, who wrote The Golems of Gotham,
There you
which is
go.
another Golem book. So, and also a historian who said it was accurate. And of course,
I need to get a word of advice from you for
Uh-oh.
writers
Yes?
who watch this show. What in your estimation is the biggest challenge for writers, and what's your best marketing tool?
my advice to writers is to write from your heart, and write what you need to write, not what somebody else thinks you need to write.
Get your story out there.
Get your story out. I think
Everybody has a story.
everybody has a story, and if I have my story is in all of these books. So I'm in here. I'm the good guys. I'm the bad guys. I'm everybody.
You're the survivor.
I'm the survivor. I am the survivor, and I started writing this when I was married to someone, and I didn't want to be, and
We must
So-
talk about that someday.
we'll talk about that. But I got a divorce, so I looked back and I said, well, I'm writing about liberation, and I got a divorce, so I needed to know. I needed to learn about liberation, and I kind of extrapolated it. And it was interesting to me, and I had other interests, that all came together. I'd say, of all of my books, I can say I'm the only one who could have written this book, and I think that
Well, that's
that should be the
definitely-
mantra for every writer.
That's definitely.
You should be, that book you're writing should be the book that only you can write, and that's what I did, and that's what I'm proud of.
And I think you should be.
Thank you.
Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for not having time about marketing, because I know nothing.
I know.
That's a whole other show.